y'all. It's your captain for all things creative coming at you with a quick review about Christopher Nolan's 2026 adaptation or reimagining, I guess, of the Odyssey. If you're new to this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're a returning, thank you so much for rocking with us. Now, before I start talking about the Christopher Nolan movie, I will say that I did read the Odyssey back in high school, and I was a Fagles translation girly. Um, a more recent translation by Emily Wilson came out, I believe, in 2017, and I'll actually pull up some of the criticisms that Wilson made about the movie, since a lot of people feel like she has a more clearer translation of the story that corresponds to modern times, and even the use of repetition in the Odyssey was done better, I guess, by Wilson. But that's neither here nor there. Since we're not talking about translations, we talk about the meat and substance of the film. And the first thing I will say about the film is that going into it was hard not to have opinions already because of all of the talk online about, especially the casting. There was a lot of misinformation about it, number one, especially since I saw a lot of people talking about how Nolan casted Elliot Page as Achilles, who's supposed to be the strongest fighter, and people were being transphobic about it. But at the end of the day, that was not even correct, because Elliot Page actually played a character named Sinon, who is more spoken about in the Aeneid, and that storyline of Sinon being the one, to lie to the, opposing side about the Trojan horse being a gift and all that, was really worked into the film in a way that it was not in the Odyssey. So already the movie had a lot of misinformation, but also that the movie was not a faithful retelling of the Odyssey, but more so Nolan's reimagination and own kind of version of it. And that character Senna actually worked well with fleshing out Antinous, and the whole deal with him being a villain in more than one ways, because he was not only a villain about, Penelope and the plot against Telemachus, but also it fleshed out, him lying to Sinan's family and things like that. So again, all the misinformation about the cast, especially Sinan, was atrocious after seeing it. And then also all the talk about Lupita, not being worthy of playing Helen Troy was silly, especially because the film itself made it a point to highlight the fact that there's a lot of propaganda around war, and the fact that it was publicized, that 1,000 ships were launched over Helen's face. Does seem kind of silly, because everybody knows that wars are fought mainly about power, and specifically in the film they talk about trade routes and greed, and so it's very clear that Helen's face is a very flimsy excuse, and Nolan even goes as far as to give Helen a huge scar on her face to highlight, the absurdity of a woman's face being the reason for all those thousands of lives being lost in war being waged. So people talking about that stuff just completely missed the point of the film, and a lot of times are low key just being racist, because they don't think that a black woman should be in a beauty role. But at the end of the day, Helen is also part God. Like, she literally, I think she was born out of an egg, so her skin color could have been anything. So people just being ridiculous about that. But also, when we talk about the film, we have to talk about the casting of Zendaya as the only true god or goddess that we see in the film intervening, because it goes into again how much of the story is really not a true retelling of the Odyssey, but more so Nolan's reimagination, because the role of the gods in the book was very undeniable, and most of the plot centered around, again, the gods favor with certain characters, whether it was Odysseus or Telemachus, and also displeasure if you're talking about um, the Cyclops' dad, and also if I think about Greco-Roman mythology, the capriciousness of the god is so clear, and it's very important in the story. So just the fact that that's really left out again shows that this is not no telling of the Odyssey that is faithful to the book in meaningful ways. After reading it, my favorite characters were Telemachus and Athena. Odysseus, I felt, went through this very long journey to be at peace with a lot of the horrible things that he did, and his journey back home definitely shows like a poetic exaggeration to me of the steps that people have to take to really sit with, the things that they have done, and in order to fully have redemption, it is a arduous and the heartfelt and often daunting process, to face your own demons. And, it's externalized through different monsters, like the Cyclops, and, symbols of things that represent, escapism and substance use, like the lotus and things like that. But when I went into the film, I kind of knew that it would be a modern retelling just based on the casting alone. There's some very real criticisms of the film that actually were made by someone who did a more, I guess, modern and feminist translation that I would like to address. And these are screenshots of a longer article by Emily Wilson. I feel like you can read online, and basically the critiques that she made kind of resonate a lot with kind of my feelings about the movie as well. So I'm gonna read them, and then I'll say where I agree and where I disagree. So the first um, thought about the movie from Wilson that sticks out to me is this idea that there's a lot that was intentionally put in the film, but then there's a lot that was left out. And part of the choices, it's really, again, making it a modern story, so only keeping the parts that, resonate with our time. So I think a lot of things that were left out, like especially more explicit representation of the gods, because yes, you have Athena, but really in the main story of the Odyssey, that's like one of the hugest points of the story is, the favor or, falling out that people can have with gods, and what a huge effect the spiritual realm has on the physical realm. As a religion person, both like philosophically and personally, it's a very important point, and just the capricious nature of Greco-Roman gods in particular shines through in the story, but also just the fact that religion is not as open in the film as much as it is understated kind of force that I think is replaced more by hospitality norms. And I actually did like that about the film, because for me, an ethic of hospitality is really important, and all the, I guess, mentions and use of Zeus's law as this very key principle for all the people in the movie to live by actually sat well with me, because again, I think hospitality is so important, and it's actually one of the key ways I practice my faith, but then also in these times where we have so many conversations about how to treat immigrants and strangers, I do think that point rings more true and probably was a little bit heavy handed on Nolan's part because of the situation that we have with, immigration issues, especially in America, but really all over the world, and how people are less welcoming of the stranger, and what that says about a society and morality when we turn our back on people again who could be angels in disguise or gods in disguise, but at the end of the day are human beings, and the way people are dehumanized and their rights are being questioned just because of, you know, their immigration status is something that I think Nolan is intentional about, and it definitely speaks more to our time. And it, again, was not such a big deal in the book for what I remember, but again, I think Nolan does make that point because of the times that we're in. Now, the next criticism that I agree with is this idea about Odysseus's guilt over the war crimes, but then not really centering, the victims as much. And again, the idea that it's noble for Odysseus to feel bad about what he did instead of, really getting more heavy handed about just how bad the war crimes are. I think could have been done a little bit better because at the end of the day, it's like Odysseus or Matt Damon's character gets a pat on the back for feeling bad, but at the end of the day, you also see that that monster in him and that killer in him is kind of a necessary evil, especially in terms of how he has to deal with the suitors and the fact that he doesn't want Telemachus to get that blood on his hands and to repeat the violence, even while showing him that it's kind of necessary by doing it in front of him. It's all very complicated. So at the end of the day, if the film wanted to be more firmly anti-war and anti-violence, it could have made some different choices, but at the end of the day, there's a satisfaction and kind of like a emotional high that, the film makes happen when Odysseus gets the revenge on the suitor and the revenge for Sinon and slaughters the suitors. That kind of contradicts some of what, was showing about Odysseus feeling sorry about, his war crimes. So yeah, it's a little bit of a cognitive dissonance that you feel about like violence and war, because on the one hand, again, the movie paints it as something Odysseus has guilt over, but then it's very glorified, if you will, when it's done to the suitor. So again, a lot of contradictory elements in the film. Okay, so the next point that I completely agree with, and I think all the memes prove, is that Robert Pattinson did an amazing job with Antinous. I really think that he is coming into like another heyday. I feel like Twilight was a huge part of his rise, and a lot of his fans are from the Twilight days. But this Gen Z actor, that's a joke, mind you. He's very much doing his thing in a lot of movies. I didn't get to see the drama yet, but now I want to see it because of how amazing he was in the Odyssey. So shout out to Robert Pattinson. If anybody gets an award for this film, I think he definitely deserves it for supporting actor. And last but not least, the good of the film, besides again what I think is a great way to uplift the ethic of hospitality in the mainstream, I think the fact that people are more interested in reading this classic again is good. But on the other hand too, it does go with the far right ethos because a lot of people on the far right, and especially in white nationalist circles, like the classics and Greco-Roman culture, and you know, use it kind of as, again, proof of white supremacy, even though, when you look at the history of Greco-Roman art and knowledge, because of the way, you know, Alexander the Great and even like the Roman Empire worked, colonization and basically the stealing of ideas from other cultures that, was subjugated. Even like the library at Alexandria, it's like in Africa, it's like you know that it's not just, again, a European monopoly on art and culture, but the way um, a lot of people, or a lot of colonial influence would like to, spin history as that, oh, the bastion of culture, would be in Europe. And again, even if you're talking about Greco Roman, like, mythology and culture, they clearly even stole from each other. If you look at like the way, again, the gods and the theology is kind of like repackaged from different languages to culture. It's like very clear that there's a lot of outright stealing going on when the hands of power changed. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword, because if the interest is in reviving true history and expanding knowledge and open-mindedness, that's great. But if it's, again, to promote, you know, far right ideas about, the humanities and Greco-Roman cultures, like the epitome of, modern and white knowledge, then that's a different story. So again, you you have to take the good and the bad, and I think, again, what Nolan is trying to do was create a great film, a blockbuster film, and he succeeded. If it wasn't attached so much to the Odyssey, because I think, again, people who have read the work and people who have different ideas and critiques about the messages in the Odyssey and the way they were conveyed are gonna take issue with how the film, was done and the messages in the film. But at the end of the day, it's a good conversation starter and it is enjoyable. So I would watch it. I recommend it. I did watch it in XD format. I would like to see it in IMAX if I can get a chance. But whether you watched the film and read the books, or just watched the film and not read the book, say how you felt about it in the comments. And remember, you're the master of your fate and the captain of your soul. Bye.